Hi, and welcome back to Literature of Science 101. Today we are continuing to read The Art of Thinking Clearly by Rolf Dobelli. So in this next excerpt that I want to read, Mr. Dobelli talks a little bit about his process in creating this book, and I thought it was really interesting. He said that he started learning about logical fallacies, or in his words, he would call a failure to think clearly. I would call it a logical fallacy, probably. But anyways, he started learning more about Enlightenment era philosophy and cognitive science. And he started to realize that there was a pattern to how people make irrational decisions or logical fallacies. So he made out this list to help him avoid making those mistakes in his own life decisions. And then he realized that they would really be helpful for anyone. So what I find so interesting about this is he's also illustrating another cognitive psychology thing where bringing awareness to something outside of our control, it doesn't make us necessarily more able to control it, but it does help us plan better around it. And he uses this analogy of lightning and thunder, and he says, since Benjamin Franklin's kite flying days, thunder and lightning have not grown less frequent, powerful, or loud, but they have become less worrisome. This is exactly how I feel about my own irrationality now. We can never be perfectly rational creatures because the way that our brains make these mistakes, they have to do with bias. We talk about bias. Bias can be negative, but a great teacher of mine always said, without bias, there is no learning. And he's a professor of machine learning, so he was talking about in the context of artificial intelligence, if you aren't making associations and generalizations, then there's no prediction, there's no learning. That's actually part of learning, and also part of understanding cognitive science and bias is that bias is inevitable because it is how we make generalizations, and because a generalization is inherently heuristic, we'll talk more about that term later, it's not always going to perfectly represent every situation. There's going to be errors. So bias helps us make generalizations, and bias also always leaves room for error. So that's a mess, and that's why people get really confused about it. But it's really important to understand, because what I'm trying to say is that we don't make these logical fallacies. The reason they're a pattern is because they have to do with our evolution, and we like to think that we evolved perfectly because we imagine that it was planned by something else. But the truth is that things that are maladaptive can be passed down, and things that are adaptive in one situation and maladaptive in another situation will often be passed down, and that includes all of this. So is it advantageous to sometimes be a little bit cautious of lightning and thunder? Yeah, sometimes when you understand that thunder and lightning has to do with electricity, you also plan to not stand by a big metal pole as well.